Welcome back to All Feelings Are Good and Right, a guide to intelligent living. And I'm here with my friends, colleagues, and co-therapists who can introduce themselves.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh. I am a therapist here in Sedona and I'm excited about today to contribute to this Cliff Notes version.
Hi, and I'm also a therapist. My name's Raman, and I'm super excited to go over this Cliff Notes version of Dr. B's CBT, spiritual CBT.
And I'm super excited too because this is all going to be spontaneous, unrehearsed, um, unplanned, so we'll see how it goes. The reason it was decided to do a Cliff Notes version is this. Um, as we were looking at the number of people that had listened to each of the different chapters, it varied significantly. And I became concerned that people wouldn't really get the complete um, version of this system here of actually being your own therapist and becoming a more relaxed, complete, and whole person. Um, it's like some people learned how to use the gas pedal and the brake pedal, but didn't do any training with the steering. Some people just put the key in the ignition and didn't know what to do after that. So hence we have this Cliff Notes version here. Okay, there might be a little bit of repetition from the introduction, especially in chapter 1, because I did go into that in the introduction at some length. Okay, so let's start with uh, chapter 1, which is the difference between feelings and emotions. Then we'll go into two types of thinking, conclusive versus process thinking. Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is desires, wants, and have tos. Chapter 4 is understanding time, psychological time and chronological time. Chapter 5 is about how we make our decisions, whether it's on the instinctual pleasure pain basis or the higher order, which is order versus disorder. Chapter 6, consciousness exercise, I think that was one of the chapters that had a much higher viewing audience. So we're not actually going to go into the consciousness exercise, but we'll explain a little bit about it. And then we may even do chapter 7, which hasn't yet been posted, at least the basic idea of chapter 7 and its importance. Depending on time, this could be followed by a little bit of a presentation of part 2, which has to do with techniques for working with feelings and thoughts. And perhaps even chapter 3, which is about going beyond the limitations of human thought. A little bit more esoteric for those who are more spiritually or philosophically inclined. So I'm ready to go. Anything you'd like to say before we get started?
This work has really impacted my life in a positive way, so I'm excited to be part of this. Highlight some of the key parts of this work, and yeah, I'm excited about it. It's really been impactful for me, so I'm excited to dig in again.
Very good.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise, like I know how much this work has changed me as a
Mhm.
human and as a therapist. I feel like I'm a better therapist because of
Mhm.
this work.
Uh-huh.
And I really feel like this has helped me restructure so many distortions that I've had and restructure, just those little things you have here and there and you pick up from childhood to adulthood. And I feel like I really dive deep with this
Mhm.
work
Yeah.
into that. So I'm really grateful for you and this work, and I'm really excited for everyone to get the benefits of this. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Well, I hope that by the end of this, everybody is very excited about learning more about it and putting it into practice. And this information was put together out of, I think I started in 1970, so we got 53 years of experience in mental health. Working with a lot of patients. I used to work in hospitals, inpatient psychiatry, as well as outpatient and private practice. So a lot of this came from my training in Jungian orientation and worked with a Jungian analyst who was analyzed by Jung in the 50s in Zurich, and a fellow from India named Arvind Vasavada. Worked with him for many years. So a lot of what I've learned has come through my work with Arvind, and then applying it to the people that were coming to see me as clients or patients. And of course, the studies in cognitive behavior therapy, experiential therapy, and other modes like hypnosis and so on. So it's a combination of all of those influences that are just put into this book called All Feelings Are Good and Right, A Guide to Intelligent Living. So here we go, chapter 1. Chapter 1 is about the distinction between feelings and emotions. That is, I don't think I've seen it anywhere in what I've read or heard in regard to the different functions of feelings and emotions. So let's go into that. A feeling is the interior private experience. And there are some systems of categorizing feelings. The systems usually put out about 8 categories: happy, sad, fearful, which would be like anxious, loving, surprise, disgust, anger, shame. Right? So we could say that there are fundamental categories of feelings. So if you ever have something felt but you don't know what to call it, you could just look at those 8 categories and say, well, is this sad? No, it's not sad. Is it happy? No, not that either. Angry? Not really. How about surprise? Yeah, I think it's in that area. So it's helpful just to have this neat little categorization system to help to identify the feelings that are there. So there are hundreds of different feeling words, but they could all fit underneath those categories there. So feelings are the interior private experience. Nobody knows what we're feeling unless we communicate it in some way through behavior or through word. Okay? And that's different from an emotion. The word emotion comes from the Latin word emovere, e meaning away from and movere meaning to move. So to emote is to move a feeling away from the interior private to the exterior public. Okay? So that's the first difference between feelings and emotions. The second difference is that we don't choose our feelings. Feelings happen innocent to us. If we could choose feelings, the 3 of us would not have the work that we do. People come to us because they generally have stuck feelings. But if we could choose our feelings, we'd say, oh, I've been unhappy now for a whole month, and I think that's long enough. I'm just going to choose to be happy or calm or relaxed. It doesn't work that way. And you don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, gee, I'll make this a happy day, but I think for variation at 3 o'clock, I'll become terrorized for 10 minutes. And then I'll go back to being happy again. And that might sound weird or strange, but isn't that what we do when we go to these movies that are shocking or scary movies and things like that? We become feeling junkies. We like to have our feelings activated. Okay. Now, emotions are different here. We can choose whether or not to emote, what to emote, how to emote. The whole of the acting industry is based on that fact, right? So as an actor, you read the script, you activate the feelings, and if you don't emote, there is no play, there is no movie, right? The story doesn't get communicated. So we can choose whether or not to emote, when and how to emote. Now, coming back to the feelings, the reason we don't and can't choose our feelings directly. Well, let me give a little demonstration of that, which you'll have in chapter 1 if you are interested in going into this in depth. So I'm going to ask Raman and Josh here, knowing that we're talking about feelings, not acting on emotions, can either of you right now create a genuine feeling of terror inside?
I can't.
No.
Do you think you might be able to work it up somehow if you were given the time to do it?
I think so, with a certain like prompts or visualizations.
Okay.
Take some like mental effort,
Yeah.
perhaps, but possibly.
Okay, so possibly,
Yeah,
right?
more or less.
Yes. Well, that brings us to the third point. The origin of a feeling is a thought or a series of thoughts, and they're not necessarily in their full consciousness. So, for example, you would have to go into visual imaging, which is thought, thinking, or some story, narrative inside, maybe some memory, if you ever had an experience of heightened anxiety and fear or terror, right? So the point is, you would have to go through thinking to get to the feeling. You cannot go change a feeling directly.
Right.
And guess what? Once you understand the function of a feeling, you would never want to go in and change a feeling directly through distraction, through denial, through substance abuse, and so on.
Right.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. Right. So the origin of a feeling is a thought or a series of thoughts, not necessarily in their full consciousness. Now, in chapter 1, if you continue on beyond this Cliff Notes version, there will be some exercises and demonstrations of that. I think the most succinct and clear demonstration of that is in chapter 1, the snake demonstration, where you would meet the snake Sally, and she has a lot to teach us. So we're just going to say for now that thoughts produce feelings. Okay. Now, what produces emotion? Well, that's a little bit more complicated. Emotions can come from our choosing to express a feeling outwardly, but sometimes emotions just kind of burst out. We call that a reaction. When we choose to express something emotionally, that's what we call a response. And we have some good examples of that in chapter 1 discussion. Okay, so a very interesting, necessary understanding offshoot of this is no word, statement, event, situation, or person ever creates a feeling in us. Now think about that for a minute. How much of our conflict is coming from the idea that somebody said or did something that got me feeling sad or angry? Okay, and or we say, oh, this situation happened and therefore I felt this feeling. Well, guess what? That's not true. It's the interpretations we give to the words and statements of others, or the events and situations we run into, or what other people do. It's how we interpret that that creates our feeling. So therefore we can say no word, statement, event, situation, or person ever creates a feeling in us. That feeling is created by the thinking, by the thoughts of the brain, which are largely automatic. And therefore, we need to take responsibility for what we feel, and not end up blaming external circumstances for what we feel. And the really great part about that is then we don't have to wait for something else or someone else to change in order for us to have a different feeling inside, have a different experience in life. What is experience? Experience is feeling toned memory. For something to be an experience, it needs to have a feeling connected to it. Otherwise, it's simply a fact. Okay? So I want to pause a little bit here and just see if my friends have any comments or questions on that point. And you may or may not, you don't have to.
No, I mean, I think it's this can be a hard pivot, I think, for some people, because it means that you can't like blame other people or events for difficult feelings, which there could be a lot of history of doing that. So it could be kind of a scary movement to make, to that, to recognizing that you are the one that's responsible for your feelings, right? Which is both empowering and can be scary too.
Yeah, right. It can be scary initially,
right?
For sure. Yeah, and once you understand it and utilize it, it becomes deeply empowering.
Exactly.
And that's because of the fourth point, okay, which is the function of a feeling. So the function of a feeling is this: it's to expand consciousness of self and situation. So out of that deeper understanding and clarity, there can be a more effective and right response taking place, not a reaction, which goes from a feeling to an emotion like that, but a response, which means you say something to me, I feel hurt, so I have a hurt feeling inside. I might react with an anger reaction. How dare you say that to me, right? But if I understand what you said did not create my feeling, it's how I interpreted what you said that created the feeling. So then I can do the inner work, and I can say, oh, okay, so what about that's hurtful? And then I can understand that. I can say, oh, because I was thinking that you really liked me, and I became kind of dependent on your liking me, and then this is a shock to me that maybe you don't like me, right? So I would need to check that out and open up perhaps a dialogue about that. So to put it very succinctly, it would be untrue to say, you hurt my feelings. It would be very true to say, I feel hurt hearing that from you. You see the difference? It makes a huge difference in terms of our own sense of inner control of our experience and our capacity to communicate and relate effectively. Okay? So that function of a feeling is part of the intelligence system of the brain and body and the universe that created the brain and the body. It's part of the intelligence system to expand consciousness. Now, emotions are different. Emotions are part of the communication system. The function of an emotion is this: to inform others of our experience in a way that invites understanding and wins cooperation if cooperation is sought or needed. Okay? So it's to inform and to invite, just like the two I's in the head, I-N-F-O-R-M, inform, and I-N-V-I-T-E, invite. To inform and invite. Okay? Understanding. So that's the communication department. It has a different funding source than the feelings, which are part of the intelligence department. Okay, so very important to make this distinction. Because this distinction is being made, we unnecessarily carry a lot of internal conflict, interpersonal conflict, and I would say even international conflict. Okay. So any thoughts, comments, anything about this before I go on to the editor function?
I guess I just have one example
Okay.
of a story I've heard of a monk meditating on water in his own little boat. Maybe you've heard it too. But he's just silently meditating for hours, and what seems like to him is another person hits his boat, and he's like alarmed, and his eyes are still closed, but he like starts like shouting and cursing and saying, "Oh my God, who hit my boat and ruined my meditation?" But when he opens his eyes, he realizes that it's an empty boat,
Right.
and that it was something already within him.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do with somebody, awakening him from his meditation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That reminds me of when I was meditating out on a pier in Lake Michigan, and I was sitting by myself at the end of the pier, and the sun was coming up, and this little dog came running up and started to jump on my lap here. And a woman ran up and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I see you were meditating and my dog disturbed your meditation." And I said, "You can't disturb meditation.
Yeah.
Meditation is being with what is." So the dog was fully welcomed into the experience.
Right.
Yes. So great example.
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
So now the thing is, all this I borrow from Byron Katie. And I'm just going to mention it. All disturbing feelings signal that we're attaching to a thought, sentence in the brain, story in the mind that's at odds with reality in some way. Okay, so her system is called the inquiry and turnaround, or the work. And that involves aligning thoughts with fact, truth, and reality. And then we move in the direction of being more at peace, calm, maybe just relaxed or even neutral. Okay, so that fits in here with the function of the feeling to expand consciousness of self and situation. Okay, so what do we do then when we have a disturbing feeling? Well, we have this part of us called the editor. We could call it the witnessing consciousness or the observing ego. It's that part of us that doesn't have to identify with the thoughts as me or as the self. We can kind of step back from it a little bit and be able to say, oh, that's a thought. That's an idea. And wow, look at the feeling that produces. So that the identity shifts away from all of this thinking and ideas into the consciousness itself, simply being aware, being able to observe with interest but dispassionately. Okay, so in this system, we call that witnessing consciousness the editor. So when a disturbing feeling comes up, we make a phone call to the editor, right? Why editor? Well, we can use the newspaper as kind of a metaphor for how our thinking and our mind works. So we have different departments, you know, we've got the sports, the finance, the local news, international, and so on. And the function of that paper is to inform the community of what's going on so that we can participate in things if we would like, be aware. And we need to know that what's presented is factual, it's true, and that it's beneficial. So how is that assured? Well, that's the editor's function. The editor looks at it and makes that determination. Okay. 3 questions of the editor. Is the story true? Are there other truths we need to keep in mind so we have an unbiased understanding of the whole of the situation? And by the way, does this contribute to the editor, to the well-being of the community? But as an individual, I would say, does this contribute to my well-being and the well-being of those around me? Okay, so the editor has these questions that help us to understand the ideas and the thoughts that are activating our feelings and make adjustments if necessary or if needed before we actually communicate. So we go into that in detail in chapter 1. And chapter 1 ends with giving an example of one of the most disturbing emotions and feelings, well, disturbing emotions, anger. Anger as a feeling is always good and right. Its function is to expand consciousness. Anger as an emotion may or may not be. Most of the time it's not. Sometimes it is needed in order to break through some barriers or open things up in some new way. And so there will be more examples of that in chapter 1. So gave a little summary of chapter 1. And before we move on to chapter 2, anything?
No, nothing for me.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, chapter 2, conclusive versus process thinking. This largely came from my training and experience in the focusing method, the experiential therapy method called focusing, developed by Eugene Gendlin. Conclusive thinking takes things to be a fact and finality simply because they were read or they were thought or observed. Doesn't go into any inquiry or exploration. And so that would be conclusive thinking. Process thinking would hear, think, read the same thing, observe the same thing, and say, okay, this has some meaning. And I know everything in the universe is in motion and movement. And so this has a history behind it. Different factors have led up to this occurrence. And again, everything in the universe is in motion and movement, so it's going to move forward from here. Okay, and how I relate to this now is going to be part of where that goes forward, what the trajectory is of this situation or event. Okay, so process thinking sees, hears, understands the same thing that is occurring in conclusive thinking, but doesn't create problems by taking it to be a false finality. Okay. Number of good examples come up in chapter 2 about working with conclusive versus process thinking. How conclusive thinking stops understanding, stops progression. In fact, a cousin of conclusive thinking is blaming. And blaming almost always involves anger at some level, whether expressed or not. And actually the blaming arises from conclusions that are arguing with reality, such as, this shouldn't have happened. Sorry, it did. Okay. So process thinking has a cousin, which is called understanding. So when something occurs that's unpleasant, uncomfortable, disruptive, it pays to understand what the factors are that were involved in that occurrence so that we can do our best to make sure that things go differently into the future. Blaming is about the past. Understanding is about utilizing the past to arm ourselves with new ways of doing things or possibilities for doing things and moving into a future that we would want to experience. Okay. One last thing about conclusive versus process thinking. All labeling is conclusive thinking. So for example, if I'm labeling myself, let's say I have a problem with another critic and I say, boy, I'm really stupid. That's labeling. Okay. Now, that's conclusive thinking. I am stupid. And guess what? That's shorthand for something that comes through when we engage in process thinking. So I'm stupid means, in process thinking terms, gee, I wish I wouldn't have done that. It really makes my life more complicated. And I'd be a lot better off if I could find some different ways of responding to these things instead of just reacting. That's process thinking. That opens it up, it opens to possibilities rather than shutting things down negatively. Okay, so I'm going to pause and see if there's anything more about conclusive process thinking.
I'm good. What about you?
One thing I would offer is with labels.
Mhm.
I think some labels are okay and potentially healthy, but the thing is to really be aware of them as such, right? Like
As labels.
a positive label could be I'm a loving brother, or I'm a runner, or in the addiction field, right? Some folks use labels to help stay sober, right? So I think there can be some labels that are conclusive that can be helpful, but once again, it's important to notice and be aware of what's going on.
Yeah. So as I'm hearing that, I'm thinking, well, those labels would be more in the realm of positive, not blaming,
Right.
but I think expanding consciousness to be more aware, and that becomes positively utilized going forward. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good distinction. So that these would be negative labels that we're referencing, and you're pointing out, well, there are some positive labels that can be beneficial and useful. Right. Okay, chapter 3, desires, wants, and have-tos. So chapter 3 goes into desires and wants in a more detailed way than I'm going to present here. But there's a difference between desires and wants. A desire, like a feeling, is the internal private experience. Nobody knows what our desires are. We don't know what anybody else's desires are unless they're communicated to us verbally or through some kind of behavior or action. Okay? So a desire is in the interior private space. And just like with feelings, we don't choose our desires. Desires happen in us and to us. Okay? Okay, now a want is going to be defined as a desire moved into action. Okay, so that's very much like an emotion. If we take a look at the parallel between feelings and emotions and desires and wants, an emotion is a feeling put into action. Okay, here a want is a desire put into action. And that has great utility, especially for people that are burdened with guilt. And it's very good for people that are caught up in attempting to change feelings through substances or compulsive behaviors. And I'll give a little example of what's meant here. Okay, so I have some thoughts that come into my mind that produce guilt, some habits, behaviors, and so on. Now, if I make that a conclusion about myself, conclusive thinking, it's going to have me feeling scared, anxious, nervous, maybe depressed, something like that. Right? And it's because I learned something like, if I think it, I'm responsible for it. And I'm saying, oh, no. If you think it, it means that you've had some conditioning going on in your life that has produced the brain that has these thoughts that will come in automatically. Because remember, you're not choosing your desires and the thoughts that go behind the desires. They're happening in you and to you, right? And but where we are responsible is what we do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we act on that or not? Do we move it into the realm of want or not? So if you understand that desire can come, there's never ever any problem with that desire. There's only a problem with it if I engage in some desire, if I move it to the level of want, and then it creates conflict internally or between myself and others, then it's a problem. So one quick little example of this, I just love this alcoholic beverage here, and somebody just handed it to me, and my desire for this is immense. I just love this drink. It's one of my favorites. And it always makes me feel so good. You know, but I do have a background of some big problems with alcohol. So I can have that desire, no problem whatsoever. If I understand and I recall that this type of thinking and this action has led to significant problems in my life, I can perhaps say, even though my desire to have the pleasure of this drink is immense, I don't want it. Why? Because I want to be healthy. So I don't have to worry about any desire that comes into me. There's a big question here. Does acting on this desire contribute to my well-being and the well-being of those around me from chapter 1? If yes, and it's true, go with it. In this instance, it wouldn't be true. So if the answer is no, it's not true, then the follow-up question is, well, then what does contribute to my well-being and the well-being of those around me? To put that down, go get myself a nice glass of water, come back and enjoy the conversation without conflict, without putting myself in conflict or risking being in conflict with others. Okay, so there's a very practical utility to understanding the difference between a desire and a want. And of course, if you go into chapter 3, we'll give more examples of this and go into it in more detail. The upshot of chapter 3 is this. When you understand that we are always doing what we want to do and we are never, ever doing anything we don't want to do, that is deeply empowering, because then you are your own authority in life and nobody else is. The word authority has the same Latin root as the word author, which means generator of ideas. So we are always generating ideas about what we think is in our best interest. Okay? The problem is sometimes what we think is in our best interest isn't. So we need to be aware of our motivations and what's driving us to have certain desires or move them into the level of wants. Okay? So when you understand that you are always doing what you want to do and never ever doing anything you don't want to do, and there are no have-tos in life, you are assuming full authority for yourself, which then allows your life to be lived more creatively and more freely. Okay, so chapter 1 informs us that the world doesn't give us our experience, but the thoughts in this brain and mind producing the feelings give us our experience in life. And chapter 3, you are your own authority in life. No one else is, nothing else is. So therefore, live it intelligently and responsibly, creatively, and enjoy it. Okay, so that's chapter 3, desires, wants, and have-tos.
Love it.
Yeah.
Good, I love it too.
I really do. It really goes to show that we are not like slaves to our desires.
That's right, we are not slaves to the desire.
It's very empowering.
Yes,
Yeah.
very empowering, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, we do not have to be simply conditioned organisms on the planet that are carrying forward everything that we learned from infancy up to now, as if we don't have a capacity to sense what's meaningful or right for ourselves as individuals.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And what really helps put all of this in place is understanding chapter 4 on time, psychological time and chronological time. In this chapter, we point out that we do not have to be prisoners of time. What does that mean, prisoners of time? The past gets carried into our present and becomes our future. Not a problem if it's a positive past. We carry it in and have a positive present and a positive future. But it is a problem if it's a negative past and we want a positive future. Okay? And too often we think because it was, it is, and will be. Not true. Okay? What's important is to understand that we do have the capacity to learn and choose what works and doesn't work, or what's in our best interest or isn't in our best interest. And to do that with confidence, I think, gets enhanced by understanding chronological time and psychological time. Okay? The universe has no time in it. Time is a mental construct, a concept. And it can be very useful, but it also can be very limiting. So here's the basic point of chapter 4 on time. If we have a negative past and we want a positive future, there's only one place for us to create that positive future or to create that change, and that is in the present moment. The future comes out of the present. It does not come out of the past. What I do now becomes my future. And again, we can use substance abuse as an example here, and the principle in AA, day at a time. If I'm not drinking today, guess what? I'm not drinking tomorrow. Because when that thing I call tomorrow comes, that's my today. So what I do today becomes my future. And chapter 4 on time has some very, I think, clear and meaningful demonstrations of the fact that there is no time in the universe. It's a mental concept, a mental construct. And understanding this more deeply gives you the power to create the futures that you want without having to carry the patterns of the past along with you through the present into that future.
Power of the present.
Power of the present,
Present
yes.
moment.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of the power of now, right? Like Eckhart Tolle.
Right.
Mindfulness, I mean, that all fits in here. The meditation, the Eastern philosophies, modern physics, quantum physics. This chapter really helps make sense of all of that, what people are seeking, right? Which is to find a state of inner peace, well-being, and equanimity, which is a gift of being in the now.
Right.
Okay, anything more? Or we'll move on to chapter 5.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we're good to go.
Okay, chapter 5, decision-making processes. In chapter 5, we take the principles from the first 4 chapters and put them all together to make it a very practical and pragmatic system. When you go to chapter 5, you'll see that it's done on the whiteboard in the other room here. I almost said blackboard because that's what I experienced growing up with all that chalk we were inhaling. This time we just inhale the fumes of the ink.
There you go.
Wow.
Getting better? Question mark?
I'm not sure which is
Question
better.
mark.
Okay. Yeah, it's useful to know what's the basis for our decisions. And there are 2 paradigms: pleasure-pain paradigm, where the basic tendency is to go with what is pleasant and avoid what is unpleasant, to move toward pleasure and to avoid pain, which does make sense, but it's not always the most intelligent response, especially when we're talking about the painful feelings, because the painful feelings like hurt, sad, angry, frightened are there to expand our consciousness of ourself and our situation so we can have a more effective and right response taking place. Okay, if we use pleasure to cover pain, to escape our pain, we're short-circuiting the intelligence system. And what's happening then is that we're bouncing back and forth between pleasure, pain, because we're not getting what that pain is about and making the corrective changes needed. And that's what we call suffering. when we don't attend to the pain, understand it, and work with it to create positive change. Okay. So the other paradigm is called order versus disorder, and a lot of this came out of my readings of J. Krishnamurti. Very, very useful for, and actually the chapter on time also was heavily influenced by J. Krishnamurti and David Bohm. So order versus disorder. So here, order is defined as freedom from internal conflict. And if I'm free from internal conflict, and I'm not sociopathically creating external conflict, where I have no internal conflict about creating misery for others or using others. So if I'm free from internal conflict and not instigating external conflict, then I can say I'm truly a happy person. Okay. So we go into what it means to have order in our lives, the difference between the pleasure-pain paradigm and the order-disorder paradigm, eventually taking us to the bottom line distinction, which is what all religions have attempted to get humanity to come in touch with over millennia, is we have this polar opposite tension between what we call fear and ignorance, love and intelligence. Okay? So to understand that bottom line, go into chapter 5. It's complex. That's why it's on the board. And because of time, I didn't do it the way it's usually taught, which is a blank board and go step by step putting things in. For the sake of time, you're going to see the whole thing on the board at once, but it does get explained. Chapter 5. Anything else?
I'd really recommend checking that video out. Looking at that video, the whiteboard, a lot of useful stuff in there.
Yeah, we've also posted a photo of of chapter 5.
Yeah,
I think you mentioned
the board.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So that reminds me, I guess one other thing. So when we're working with paradigm 1, our basic question is, does this give me pleasure? Does this give me pain? And the tendency is to go toward the pleasure and avoid the pain, which is a grand mistake when you're working with feelings. The other question with order versus disorder is, does thinking or doing this bring about or sustain order in my life or disorder in my life? That's the fundamental question. Okay? Because it's order in life that produces happiness, not pleasure. That's a grand mistake made in Western culture and in our society. Pleasure equals happiness. The more pleasure you have, the happier you will be. Totally false. But it is a good marketing tool. Okay. Chapter 6, consciousness exercise. I'll just say that the consciousness exercise gives an opportunity to realize and recognize that we human beings are not our thoughts and our feelings, that we are really the consciousness that is aware of the thoughts and the feelings and the sensations. If I think that I am my thoughts, I'm going to have a hard time living life because it's going to be quite limited. When I realize that I am the consciousness itself, that gives me the opportunity to step back from the thoughts, the patterns of thinking, and to step back and observe, witness, and value the feelings that are there, and live my life with a greater sense of mastery, understanding, and equanimity. Okay. So in the consciousness exercise, typically here in Sedona, that's done outside, where we have the natural sounds of the environment up at the Buddhist stupa. But for the sake of this video, it's done here in this office with our sound engineer sitting next to me here, and our recording engineer next to her. And we take you through the consciousness exercise, which involves 2 aspects. First is attending to sound happening, simply observing sound. And then part 2 of that is attending to thinking happening. And hopefully that will give you the experience of recognizing yourself as the consciousness that is aware, and That consciousness then circles all the way back to chapter 1, editor function, and the ability to objectively assess, is this true? Are there other truths we need to keep in mind? And by the way, does it contribute to my well-being and the well-being of those around me to think this thought or take this action? So that's chapter 6, I'm sorry. Chapter 7 has not yet been presented. Hopefully it will be presented within the next few weeks, but we'll see. Chapter 7 involves coming to terms with the other, or meeting the other. So what does other mean here? Well, other people, of course. Other creatures on the planet, certainly. Other objects, the environment that we live in. And boy, these days we are treating it as another. Instead of understanding that from chapter 5, something I forgot, you are the universe. You are nature. You are not part of the universe and part of nature. And we go into a scientific explanation of that, and what I would say is a proof of that. So what we think, say, and do affects not just us, but the environment around us, if not immediately, at some point, it will. Okay? So meeting the other also includes the other within. Now here's where we can bring in Carl Jung's understanding of the structure and dynamics of the psyche. So we have the consciousness, that sense of who I am, the alertness that's aware of things taking place, having experience, and so on. And then we have the unconscious. And the analytic approaches work with the personal unconscious, going back into Freud and Adler and so on. Jung expanded that sense of the unconscious to personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious being the foundation of the development of the psyche, the development of consciousness itself. So we might look at it something like this. It's like we're all icebergs floating in the same ocean. That same ocean would be the collective unconscious, that which buoys us up. The personal unconscious would be the invisible part of the iceberg that actually has a lot to do with how we move around in the ocean and move around in life. And then there's the visible part of the iceberg, which is who we think we are and who we think other people are. But really, it's more complex than that and involved. That much of our living is largely developed and driven by unconscious factors. And we can most readily see that in our dreams. I mean, who writes their own dreams? None of us write our own dreams. It comes from the unconscious. It's a compensating aspect within the psyche that helps our consciousness look at things a little bit more broadly and more honestly, openly, and truthfully. So chapter 7, not yet on there. We're just going to have an open discussion about the unconscious and how it operates. We'll take a look at the defenses, like projection. Like, that's when we're criticizing other people and not realizing that we're really talking about ourselves at some level. If I'm saying somebody is stingy and self-centered, and I say that with a strong affect, power in the emotion behind it, I'm projecting. There's a part of me that's stingy and self-centered, if not always, in some situations at least, that I'm not dealing with. And that's why I'm strongly talking about somebody else's experience. If I'm just saying, gee, they seem to be stingy and not very generous, I can say that objectively. I'm not saying it as a judgment. It's an observation. And then I might even say, gee, I wonder what's going on. Maybe it would be helpful if they did this or that. Very different from projection as a projecting of the contents of my own psyche onto someone or something else. All of our idolization of the stars and the rock music, we don't call them stars, what do we call them? Celebrities, thank you, right. That's all projection as well, right? We're taking the positive aspects within ourselves and we're projecting it onto them and just thinking, oh, how wonderful it would be to be admired like that, to be adored like that, to have that wealth and all that. Yeah, that's actually a projection of our own desires and needs and wants operating from inside. When the projection is not operating, we say, gee, they've got great talent. It's fun to listen to them. And just treat them as another human being on the planet as ourselves. So projection, very important to understand. Other things like denial, critical in terms of substance abuse, understanding that, repression and so on. But we would just be discussing these things in general. So chapter 7, that may be coming up. How much time do we have left here? You know?
A few minutes, maybe?
Okay, so I'll take a couple minutes to go into part 2 of the book. This is all part 1 of the book, understanding how we're built and how we operate. Part 2 would be going into 3 different strategies about working with feelings and the thoughts, stories behind the feelings. The foundational strategy is called focusing. It's based on the work of Eugene Genlin. And there's a book called Focusing. Actually, this is the original hardcover Focusing book. I don't know if you can see that there, but if not, that's okay. And that is the primary tool for being able to get the right distance from your feelings so that you can inquire, try to understand where they're coming from, and then what's needed to move it forward. So focusing is a process of paying attention to the body sense of the whole of a situation or issue, and then utilizing that body sense to invite an inquiry. 2 fundamental sorts of questions. One is, where is this coming from? What's underneath or behind it? The other set of questions, what would move this in a better direction, or where might this go? Focusing process, you can go to focusing.org and go into their website, look at the materials they have. You can do training online for learning how to do focusing. You can learn how to teach focusing. You can also find focusing-oriented therapists through the website. So I recommend that. So focusing is the foundation, I think, for the best way to get in touch with the feelings, understand what's underneath, behind, and how to work with that effectively. A second approach is based on Byron Katie's work. Her book is called Loving What Is, the first book. And her system, I think, is really powerful, very simple. And it's a very fast way of getting through projections. It mainly deals with projection. And she has a worksheet called Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet. At least that's what I remember from way back when I first learned this. And how to do this inquiry and turnaround where we free ourselves from negative judgments on others, get to see what's really existing in ourselves, and affectionately and caringly work with that to improve things. Okay? So I would suggest you might pick up her book, Loving What Is. The website, I believe, is thework.org. I don't know if, I haven't been on that for a long time. I presume it's still operating that way, thework.org. Byron Katie. The third system actually came out of research I was participating in back in the 90s. It was a research on a new medication. And we had this cognitive behavior therapy program developed for this research. And it came out of University of Virginia Mood Disorders Clinic. And it's a coping survey questionnaire. Very simple thing. What is my situation? Put in a very succinct form. How do I interpret what happened in the situation? What actions did I take in that situation? What was my actual outcome? And what was my desired outcome? And did I achieve my desired outcome? If not, why not? Go back to your thoughts. And then there's a systematic way of working with thoughts and moving them away from being overly generalized, not having support or evidence, or simply not just contributing to your desired outcome. Amazing. To get into the study, you had to have chronic depression, at least 2 years duration, unimproved by medication or therapy. And the range, there are 600 patients in it. The range of depression was from 2 years to 20 years, 600 patients, medication alone, new medication, 45% got better out of their depression. And guess what? Using this CBT, an equal number, 45% without medication came out of their depression, including the appetite changes, the energy level changes, concentration, all of that. When people had the combination of the two, it was close to 2/3 came out. I found out that after the study was over, I could use this for anything. I even taught people how to use it for procrastinating on their housekeeping, for not doing their work at work. A very powerful system for taking responsibility for our own experience. So that would be in part 2. Part 3, we'll see if we get to going beyond the limitations of human thought. That's learning how to more strongly identify yourself with the consciousness itself and begin to see things with a greater clarity out of what we might call a direct perception of what is. A little example of this goes way back, about 40 some years, when I was working on the paper with a psychiatrist friend of mine. And I was doing the statistics on it, but I wasn't around this day. So he was doing it, and he came in, and he was doing what we call the sums of squares. Like if you have sums of squares, you've got 2, 3, and 4. 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. So that's 29. That's the sum of the squares, I think. Did I add right?
I think so.
Anyway, so he's doing it with decimal points. And so I came in and I said, Richard, I said, what are you wasting your time for? The answer is 0.1735284. And 5 minutes later, he came up with exactly that. And he said, Barry, how do you do that? I said, I don't. It just happened. So that's an example, kind of a strange, quirky one, of direct perception of what is. Okay, so part 3, we'll see if we get to that. All right, I think that's it in a nutshell. Thoughts, comments?
That was beautiful. Yeah, I was just thinking how for us, like those of us who are dealing with some challenging thoughts and feelings, to really utilize this tool, and because those thoughts and feelings are expanding consciousness, and I think it's just such an empowering take on all our thoughts and feelings, and not to shun any shadow qualities, but they just inform us of where we can, dive a little deeper and see what's keeping us from our highest joy, bliss, happiness. By going deeply into the pain, the projection, addictions, etc.
That's right.
So yeah, I just want to say there's just great beauty to this work, and it really, really does empower you and gives you these tools to like expand your consciousness with all thoughts and feelings, and it's just so freeing to me. There's just so much freedom in that.
Very beautifully said. Yes.
Thank you.
And I loved it when you said there's great beauty in this work, because there is. There's great beauty in this. Right.
Yeah.
Then we become friends with ourselves and everybody else.
Right.
Not fearing our own feelings or anybody else's.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Like to not be afraid of my own feelings and my thoughts, like how beautiful.
Yes.
And then to teach others to do that, it just it makes me kind of emotional just thinking about it, because it just it enhances our human experience and also deeply connects you to understanding others and having deep compassion of like those worst bottom rock spaces that we can be in,
Right. Yes. So all feelings are good and right. So as you shared now that you're becoming somewhat emotional, right? And there's a kind of tears welling up. That's a beautiful thing, right? Now, many times people say, "Oh, I'm sorry," because they're crying or get tears. Why should we ever say we're sorry? That simply says that we're feeling something with intensity, that there's something of meaning or value there, and we should celebrate that. Right.
Thank you.
We don't blame a cloud for raining.
Right. That would be silly.
Well, I think that points to just the cultural misinformation and misunderstanding of this, of feelings, which I think if you look at our culture, we're in kind of a tight spot in some ways.
Yeah, very.
So, I think as it can be overwhelming to like turn on the news or look at what's going on
Yeah.
with like the pandemic and but this is a powerful switch to make of like, you know, engaging in some of this work and doing that like pivoting inward a little bit more. So I just thank both of you very much, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you in, oh, well, you'll see us. We won't see you.
Yeah.
You'll see us in the upcoming chapters.
See ya.
All right.